A rancher gave a ride to an Apache widow, and by tribal law, had to marry her and stay with her. The sun was dipping low in the sky, painting the horizon in shades of orange and gold, when John Miller guided his wagon toward the outskirts of the Apache village. He had no idea that this simple act of helping a weary traveler would soon change the course of his life. As the wagon creaked along the rugged trail, Maria sat quietly beside him, her eyes focused on the fading light. She did not speak much, but John could feel a story behind every glance, every sigh that slipped past her lips. He respected her silence. It seemed as if words might disturb the delicate balance of her grief and the weight of the journey she had endured. When they finally arrived at the village, John noticed the change in atmosphere immediately. The air, which had felt open and welcoming on the road, now seemed charged with watchful eyes. Children paused in their play, elders muttered under their breath, and a few of the younger men paused at the edge of the path to stare. Maria's pace slowed as she stepped down from the wagon, her small hands clutching the edges of her shawl tightly around her shoulders. John had expected perhaps, Part 1, co-expand crow without heading 1,500 words in simple English words. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. And don't use any violated word. Avoid any violated content absolutely. I can expand Part 1 into a detailed, engaging, and fully safe 1,500-word narrative in simple English. Here's an expanded version. The sun had just begun its slow climb over the horizon, spilling warm golden light over the dusty trails of the Arizona Territory. John Miller, a rugged rancher known for his honesty and steady hands, guided his wagon along a lonely stretch of road. The landscape was wide and empty, dotted with sagebrush and twisted desert trees, and the wind carried a faint hint of the distant mountains. John's eyes were fixed on the horizon, scanning for signs of life, though he had long since learned that in these parts, life often came slowly and silently. His horse trudged along steadily, as if sensing that today, something unusual might be waiting around the next bend. As he turned a corner, John noticed a lone figure walking along the trail ahead. At first, he thought it might be another traveler, but as he drew closer, he could see that it was a woman. She was small, almost frail in appearance, and her clothing, though simple, was worn and dusty from travel. Her eyes, however, caught John's attention immediately. They were dark, deep, and full of a quiet sorrow, the kind of sorrow that spoke of loss and hardship. He slowed the wagon to a gentle stop, instinctively sensing that she needed help, though he did not yet understand why. "Are you all right?" John asked gently, stepping down from the wagon. The woman looked at him briefly as if weighing his question, then nodded slightly. Her voice when she spoke was soft and measured. "I need to get to the village," she said. "I have no other way." John could see that she was exhausted. Her feet were dusty and scraped, her hands thin and worn. Without hesitation, he offered her a seat in his wagon. "I can give you a ride," he said. "It's a long way on foot and it's not safe for someone traveling alone." She hesitated for a moment, as if uncertain, then slowly stepped up beside him, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. As they traveled, the silence between them was not uncomfortable. John respected it, sensing that her thoughts were heavy. Occasionally, she would glance at the passing landscape, her eyes reflecting both the beauty of the desert and a deep, lingering sadness. John tried to make small conversation, speaking of simple things, the weather, the land, the progress of his ranch. But she offered only brief responses, polite but reserved. Yet even in her quiet, John could feel her presence strongly, a quiet strength that seemed to grow with each mile they traveled. The road was rough, and the wagon jolted over stones and uneven ground. John's hands gripped the reins firmly, keeping the horses steady, while he also kept an eye on the woman beside him. At one point, a gust of wind swept across the trail, lifting dust and sand into the air. She instinctively pulled her shawl tighter and John reached over to steady her. "Almost there," he said with a reassuring nod. "The village is not far." As they approached the outskirts, John noticed the first signs of settlement. Small huts clustered together, smoke rising from cooking fires and children playing near the edges of the path. But there was something different about the reception they received. From a distance, villagers paused in their work, their eyes following the wagon as it drew closer. John felt a subtle tension in the air, something he could not immediately understand. The woman beside him seemed to notice it too, her grip on the edge of the wagon tightening, though she did not speak. Finally, they reached the center of the village, where elders were gathered under the shade of a large tree. The moment they saw John and the woman, a murmur ran through the crowd. John could feel the weight of their gaze, curious and watchful, and he sensed that something about his act of kindness, something entirely innocent from his perspective, carried deeper meaning in this place. He helped the woman down from the wagon, steadying her as she stepped onto the ground. "Here you are," he said kindly. "I hope this helps." She nodded, her eyes briefly meeting his in a glance that seemed to contain both gratitude and a quiet warning. John had no idea what that warning meant, only that it felt important to pay attention. An older man with lined skin and sharp eyes, approached them. He spoke to the woman in a language John did not understand, and she responded with a respectful nod. John waited patiently, unsure of what was happening. Then the elder turned his gaze to him, and John felt the weight of tradition and authority in that look. The man gestured toward the woman and then to John, speaking firmly but not unkindly. Though John could not understand the words, the tone and gestures were clear. Something about his act of giving her a ride had obligations attached, obligations he had never anticipated. John's mind raced. He had only intended to help a weary traveler, to do what he thought was right. But now he realized that in this culture, kindness carried a responsibility he could not ignore. He looked at the woman, who met his gaze calmly, almost knowingly. There was no fear in her eyes, only a quiet acknowledgement that he had entered a world with rules he had not yet learned. As the villagers continued to watch, John began to understand that this was not just about him or the woman alone. It was about respect, tradition, and the careful balance of relationships within the community. His simple decision to offer a ride had placed him within that balance, and he would need to navigate it carefully. He realized that helping someone was never just about the act itself. It was about understanding the consequences, the responsibilities, and the trust that came with it. John spent the rest of the day observing the village, learning small customs and gestures that showed respect and humility. He helped carry water, watched the women prepare food, and listened quietly to the elders' stories. Though he did not fully understand the language or the deeper laws of the tribe, he felt a connection growing, a sense that he was part of something larger than himself. That evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains and the sky turned deep shades of pink and purple, John sat beside the fire with the woman. She spoke a few words in her own tongue, and though he did not understand, the tone was gentle and steady. He realized that even in silence, there was communication, understanding, and trust. The moment felt fragile yet profound, a bridge between two worlds that had been brought together by a simple act of kindness on a dusty desert road. As the stars began to appear in the vast night sky, John reflected on the journey. He had started the day as a lone rancher, guiding his wagon through familiar trails, and now he was part of a story far larger than he had imagined. He knew that challenges lay ahead, but for the first time in a long while, he also felt a sense of purpose and belonging. By helping someone in need, he had entered a world of tradition, culture, and responsibility, and he was ready to learn, to respect, and to face whatever came next. And so, the day ended with the quiet understanding that one simple act, offering a ride to a stranger, could change lives in ways no one could predict. John Miller had taken a step into a new life, not fully aware of what it would demand, but certain that he would face it with honesty, respect, and courage. As John stepped off the wagon, the weight of the villagers' gaze pressed upon him in a way he had never felt before. Each person seemed to be watching, analyzing, judging. Children stopped their play and whispered to one another, while the elders stood still, observing with quiet authority. John glanced at Maria, the woman he had helped, and noticed her calm composure. Despite the attention, she remained poised, her hands folded in front of her as if she were used to the eyes of others following her every movement. John had assumed that offering her a ride would be a simple act of kindness, nothing more. But as he looked around, he realized that he had entered a place with rules he did not yet understand. The elder who had first approached them now came closer, speaking in a language John could not follow. He gestured toward Maria, then toward John, repeating the motion several times. The tone of his voice was firm but not angry. From the gestures and expressions, John understood that there was a deeper meaning behind his act, one he had not anticipated. He shifted his gaze to Maria. She gave him a small nod, almost imperceptible, acknowledging that John would soon understand the significance. Though she had accepted his help without hesitation, it was clear that her community had a tradition attached to such an action, one that required John to stay, to take on responsibilities he had never imagined. His heart began to race as he tried to comprehend what this might mean. The elder spoke again, this time using more gestures, indicating that John was to follow him. With Maria at his side, John walked to the center of the village, where a small fire was burning and other elders had gathered. The villagers formed a circle around them, giving space yet making it clear that everyone was observing closely. John realized that he was being tested, not in strength or skill, but in respect, patience, and understanding. The elder began explaining, slowly and with great care, the law that governed their people. Though John could not understand the words, he could sense the rhythm, the seriousness, and the weight of what was being communicated. By helping a widow in need, John had unknowingly entered into a sacred responsibility. The law of the tribe required that he take her into his care, not just for a short time, but as a permanent commitment. The widow, by tradition, could not live alone, and any man who aided her in such a moment was bound to marry her and remain with her, offering protection and partnership for life. John felt a mixture of surprise, confusion, and responsibility. This was not something he had expected when he decided to give her a ride. He looked at Maria, searching for some hint of how she felt about this unexpected situation. She met his eyes steadily, her expression unreadable at first, but then softened slightly, as if to say that while this law might seem strange to him, it was a rule that shaped the lives of her people in a way that demanded respect. Over the next few hours, John observed the village carefully. He learned small lessons quickly, how to show respect, how to avoid actions that might be seen as rude, and how to participate in daily activities without overstepping boundaries. He carried water from the well for Maria and the elders, helped gather firewood, and watched how the women cooked over the flames. Every task seemed ordinary at first, but John realized that each action held meaning, a way to show humility and willingness to be part of the community. As he worked, he noticed the subtle ways in which the villagers communicated. A nod, a glance, or a pause could speak volumes. John began to understand that while he could not yet grasp every word or gesture, he could learn by observing, by listening, and by showing care through actions rather than words alone. Maria, though quiet, seemed to guide him with her presence. When he hesitated or moved awkwardly, she would offer a small, patient smile or a gentle correction. Through her guidance, John started to feel less like an outsider and more like someone who could find a place within this community. By late afternoon, John was asked to sit with the elders near the fire. Though he could not understand their full conversation, the tone and gestures were enough for him to grasp the importance of the discussion. They spoke of responsibility, commitment, and the expectations that came with honoring tradition. John listened intently, aware that his future was being shaped not by his own plans, but by the law of a people whose ways he had only begun to comprehend. As the sun began to sink behind the distant mountains, John took a moment to speak with Maria privately. "I didn't know this would happen," he said softly. "I only wanted to help you. I didn't mean to get caught up in your laws." Maria looked at him calmly, her dark eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "You didn't know," she said gently. "But now that you do, you must decide. You can turn away, but it will not be simple. You have responsibilities now." John nodded, realizing the truth of her words. He had entered this world by chance, yet the choice he now faced was not one to be taken lightly. He felt the weight of the village's expectations, the gravity of their customs, and the quiet strength of the woman beside him. In that moment, he understood that his life would never be the same again. The evening was filled with quiet activity. The villagers shared stories around the fire, teaching John through demonstration rather than language. He learned how to cook simple meals, how to care for the small herd of animals, and how to move respectfully through the village. Maria remained close, a constant presence, guiding him subtly, showing him the rhythms of daily life that were so different from his own ranch work. John noticed small details he had never paid attention to before. The way children greeted elders with a bow, the care with which each person handled tools, the way the community moved together as one unit. Each gesture, each action, reinforced the idea that tradition was not just rules, but a way of life that connected every individual to the others. He began to see that by accepting this law, he would be entering a world where respect, patience, and understanding were more valuable than strength or wealth. By nightfall, John lay on a simple mat in one corner of the communal house. He could hear the soft breathing of Maria nearby, and the distant sounds of the village settling down for the night. He thought back to the trail where he had first seen her, weary and alone, and marveled at how a single act of kindness had led him to this place. The world he had known, the wide open spaces of his ranch, the solitude he had often cherished, now seemed distant, replaced by a life of connection, duty, and the delicate balance of community. As sleep approached, John reflected on what he had learned that day. He understood that offering help was never simply about the immediate act. It carried consequences, responsibilities, and unexpected rewards. He had stepped into a world that required him to adapt, to learn, and to respect traditions far older than his own experiences. Though he did not yet know what the future held, he felt a quiet determination. He would honor the law he had unintentionally invoked, and he would do so with integrity and patience. In the morning, John awoke to the soft light of dawn spilling through the small window of the communal house. Maria was already awake, tending to small tasks quietly, her movements fluid and precise. He watched her for a moment, realizing that she had faced loss and hardship with strength, and that now, by the law of her people, he would be by her side, not as a stranger but as a companion and protector. As the village stirred to life, John knew that the path ahead would not be easy. He would face challenges, misunderstandings, and the slow work of earning trust. Yet he also understood that this journey, born of a simple act of kindness, was an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to become part of something greater than himself. He felt a sense of quiet resolve. He would meet each day with respect, patience, and an open heart, knowing that by doing so, he honored not only the woman he had helped, but the traditions and wisdom of the community that had welcomed him into their world. And so, the day began with promise and uncertainty, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts can carry the greatest consequences, and that life's most important lessons often arrive in unexpected ways. The days that followed John's arrival in the village were filled with learning, adjustment, and quiet reflection. Though he had accepted, at least in part, the responsibilities that came with the tribal law, he quickly realized that adapting to life in the village would be more challenging than he had imagined. The routines, customs, and expectations were entirely different from the open, solitary life he had known on his ranch. Everything, from how to carry water to how to greet neighbors, required observation, patience, and respect. From early morning, John rose with the sun, as did the rest of the villagers. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of the desert and the faint aroma of breakfast fires. Maria moved beside him with a quiet grace, already immersed in her own daily duties. She prepared small meals, gathered water, and organized the few belongings they had. John, though unfamiliar with most of the tasks, tried his best to help. He lifted heavy buckets of water, carried firewood, and even attempted to help with small repairs around the communal house. At first, his movements were clumsy, and he occasionally spilled water or tripped over the simple tools, but Maria remained patient, offering guidance without a hint of frustration. John began to notice how closely the villagers watched him. Every action seemed to carry meaning beyond its immediate purpose. A nod, a glance, or a pause could indicate approval or gentle correction. He realized that he could not simply act on instinct. He had to observe and learn the unspoken rules that guided daily life. This realization weighed on him, but it also sparked a determination to prove himself, not as an outsider, but as someone worthy of trust and respect. As the days turned into weeks, John slowly began to adapt. He learned the proper way to gather firewood, the careful technique for carrying water without spilling it, and even how to help with small farming tasks. The elders continued to watch him closely, speaking to him in slow, deliberate words, accompanied by gestures that helped him understand the meaning. Though the language barrier remained, John found that actions often spoke louder than words. By showing willingness, humility, and consistency, he began to earn a place within the community. Maria, meanwhile, remained a quiet and steady presence. She had endured hardship and loss, and her strength was evident in the way she moved, spoke, and observed the world. She guided John with gentle corrections, showing him how to perform tasks correctly, and occasionally offering a smile of encouragement when he succeeded. John admired her resilience and grace, recognizing that the woman beside him was far stronger than he had first realized. Slowly, a bond began to form between them, not born of immediate affection, but of mutual respect and shared experience. Despite his growing comfort with daily routines, John faced challenges. Some villagers, particularly younger men, were wary of his presence. They whispered among themselves, questioning whether he would honor the traditions and commitments he had entered into. John understood their caution. After all, he was an outsider, a stranger in a world that valued trust and long-standing customs. Instead of responding defensively, John focused on proving himself through actions. He offered help whenever possible, spoke politely even when misunderstandings arose, and demonstrated patience in all interactions. Gradually, the murmurs of doubt began to fade, replaced by cautious acceptance. One day, while helping repair a small fence on the edge of the village, John faced a particularly difficult challenge. A strong wind had loosened several posts, and the task required both strength and careful planning. John worked tirelessly, repositioning the posts and securing them in place. Maria and a few villagers watched quietly, offering advice only when necessary. By the end of the day, the fence was solid, and the village's respect for John grew. He felt a quiet satisfaction, not pride, but a sense of accomplishment that came from meeting a challenge with patience and determination. The work was not always physical. John also had to navigate the social customs of the village, which were complex and sometimes subtle. He learned when to speak and when to remain silent, how to show respect to elders, and how to offer assistance without overstepping boundaries. Every interaction was a lesson, and John approached each day with careful attention, aware that missteps could carry consequences. Over time, he began to feel less like an outsider and more like a member of the community, connected not only through obligation but through shared experience and mutual understanding. As John's confidence grew, so too did his connection with Maria. They spent quiet moments together, often working side by side on chores or tending to small animals. Their conversations were limited at first due to the language barrier, but they found ways to communicate through gestures, smiles, and shared tasks. John learned to understand the subtle expressions in Maria's eyes, the way she would raise an eyebrow to offer gentle guidance, or nod in quiet approval when he completed a task correctly. These small interactions built trust and a sense of companionship, laying the foundation for a deeper connection that neither could yet fully name. Life in the village was not without difficulty. The desert environment was harsh, with scorching heat during the day and cold nights. Food was simple, often consisting of beans, corn, and small amounts of meat, and water had to be carried from a distant well. John had grown accustomed to a more comfortable life on his ranch, yet he began to appreciate the resilience and resourcefulness required to survive here. He learned to be grateful for small successes, whether it was a fire that burned steadily through the night or a freshly repaired roof that could withstand the next storm. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills, John and Maria sat outside the communal house. The village was quiet, the only sounds the occasional laugh of children playing and the soft murmur of conversation. John reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from the moment he saw Maria walking alone on the trail to the realization that he was now bound by tribal law to remain by her side. It had been a journey of unexpected responsibilities, challenges, and growth. He realized that this new life, though unfamiliar, offered him lessons he could never have learned alone. Maria spoke softly, pointing toward the horizon where the last light of day faded. Though John could not understand her words fully, the meaning was clear in her tone and expression. She was acknowledging the progress he had made, the effort he had shown, and the way he had begun to understand the customs of the village. John felt a surge of gratitude and humility. He knew that he was far from perfect, but he was committed to learning, to respecting the traditions, and to being someone Maria and the community could rely on. In the weeks and months that followed, John's life became a balance of work, learning, and quiet observation. He continued to prove himself through action, demonstrating reliability, respect, and willingness to adapt. Maria remained by his side, guiding him with patience and subtle instruction. The villagers, once wary, gradually accepted him as part of the community. Though the bond between John and Maria was still developing, there was a growing sense of partnership, built on shared effort, mutual respect, and the unspoken understanding that they were now connected by more than just law. They were connected by life itself. John came to understand that being part of this community was not about domination or control, as he had once imagined in his life as a rancher. It was about cooperation, empathy, and respect for others. Every day brought small lessons, and every action, no matter how minor, contributed to the larger harmony of the village. He learned to celebrate successes, to endure hardships, and to honor the wisdom of those who had lived here long before him. Through these experiences, John also began to reflect on his own past life. The open plains of his ranch, once a source of pride and independence, now seemed less important than the connections he was forming here. He realized that strength was not measured solely by physical ability or personal freedom, but by the capacity to adapt, to learn, and to contribute meaningfully to the lives of others. In the quiet moments, as he worked beside Maria or observed the villagers, he felt a growing sense of purpose, a purpose that was rooted in service, respect, and shared humanity. By the end of this period of adjustment, John had transformed in ways he could scarcely have imagined. He was no longer merely a rancher traveling through the desert. He was a member of a community, a partner to a woman who had once been a stranger, and a man learning the value of patience, respect, and commitment. The challenges he faced had not always been easy, but they had shaped him, taught him humility, and offered the beginnings of a bond that could withstand time, hardship, and change. As night fell over the village, the firelight flickered across John's face. He thought back to the first day, to the moment he had offered Maria a ride, unaware of the law that would bind him to her side. What had seemed like a simple act of kindness had evolved into a journey of learning, growth, and unexpected responsibility. And though the path ahead remained uncertain, John knew that he was no longer alone. He was part of something larger, and together with Maria, he would face whatever came next with patience, understanding, and a quiet determination to honor the life he had entered. Life in the village had grown familiar to John, yet he could not ignore the challenges that continued to test his patience and understanding. Even after months of learning the customs, assisting with daily chores, and slowly earning the trust of the villagers, there were still moments when he felt the weight of his new responsibilities most heavily. It was not just the physical labor or the adjustments to unfamiliar routines. It was the deeper, often invisible test of loyalty, respect, and cultural understanding. Every action, however small, had meaning, and any misstep could ripple through the tightly woven life of the community. One morning, John awoke to the sounds of children playing outside and the faint smell of smoke from cooking fires. Maria was already up, moving silently through the tasks she had learned to manage over the years. John admired her efficiency and the calm certainty in her movements. He had come to realize that Maria's strength was both quiet and profound. She carried her past grief with dignity, and her resilience was a guiding force not only for him but for the entire village. Today, however, John sensed a shift in the atmosphere. There was tension in the air, subtle but unmistakable. The elders were gathered near the central fire, speaking in low voices that carried an undercurrent of concern. Some of the younger villagers lingered nearby, their expressions wary. John soon learned, through gestures and partial translation by Maria, that a dispute had arisen between two neighboring families over land boundaries and water usage. Such disputes were not uncommon, but the elders had decided that the matter required careful handling to prevent lasting discord. As someone who had gained partial trust, John was invited to observe and assist, though he quickly realized that the challenge was far more delicate than any physical task he had faced. John watched closely as the elders spoke with measured calm. They listened, asked questions, and allowed each side to explain their perspective. It was a slow process, but it was clear that their approach valued fairness, respect, and understanding above all else. John began to see the depth of the wisdom he had only glimpsed before. Authority in this community was not demonstrated through force or dominance, but through patience, empathy, and the ability to guide others toward resolution. Maria stood beside him, her presence steadying him as he absorbed the lesson. She explained, through gestures and simple words, the importance of listening before acting, of observing the subtle cues in voice and expression, and of maintaining neutrality while offering support. John realized that this approach was not just about resolving a single disagreement. It was about sustaining the harmony and trust that held the entire community together. In a way, it mirrored the challenges he faced in his own journey, learning to be part of something larger than himself, to act with awareness, and to honor the responsibilities that had been placed upon him. The days that followed tested John in new ways. Tasks that had once seemed simple, like tending the small herd of goats or helping repair the communal shelter, now required careful consideration of both practical needs and social expectations. John learned to navigate conflicts quietly, offering assistance without overstepping and speaking only when invited. His presence was gradually accepted not just as a worker, but as someone who respected the delicate balance of relationships in the village. Yet the greatest test came not from work or community disputes, but from his relationship with Maria. Over time, John had developed deep respect and quiet affection for her, but the nature of their bond was complex. They were connected by law, by obligation, and by the circumstances of their meeting, yet they were still learning to understand each other as individuals. Maria had lived through loss and hardship, and she carried her past experiences carefully, never allowing them to dominate her interactions, but remaining conscious of the boundaries they created. One evening, after a long day of work under the scorching sun, John and Maria sat together outside the communal house. The sky was painted with the brilliant colors of sunset, and the village had settled into a calm rhythm. John spoke softly, attempting to express his thoughts in words that might bridge the gap between their languages. "I sometimes worry," he admitted, "that I cannot fully understand your ways, or that I may make mistakes that upset you or the others. I want to do right, but I fear I fall short." Maria listened quietly, her eyes thoughtful. She reached out and placed a hand gently on his arm, a simple gesture yet full of meaning. Through her touch, John felt reassurance and acceptance. He realized that understanding was not always immediate, that patience and consistency were as important as any words he could speak. The bond between them was developing slowly, nurtured by shared work, mutual respect, and a growing awareness of each other's strengths and vulnerabilities. As the weeks turned into months, John's confidence in his role within the village grew. He learned not only to carry out tasks efficiently, but also to anticipate needs, to act with consideration, and to offer support in ways that reinforced the harmony of the community. The elders acknowledged his efforts, sometimes with a nod, sometimes with a quiet smile. Children began to approach him without hesitation, asking questions or seeking guidance, and even some of the more skeptical villagers began to include him in daily activities and conversations. Despite these successes, John was never complacent. He knew that respect had to be earned continually, and that cultural understanding was an ongoing process. Each day offered new lessons, whether in practical skills, social interactions, or the subtleties of human emotion. He observed Maria carefully, learning from her approach to life, her patience, and her quiet determination. Through her guidance, he developed a deeper appreciation for the values that sustain the community: respect, cooperation, empathy, and resilience. One particularly challenging day tested John's growth in unexpected ways. A sudden storm swept across the desert, bringing strong winds and heavy rain. The communal shelters needed urgent repair, and livestock had to be secured to prevent injury or loss. John worked tirelessly alongside the villagers, reinforcing structures, moving animals to safer areas, and assisting with emergency repairs. The storm raged through the afternoon and evening, leaving the village drenched and exhausted. By the time the skies cleared, John and the others were soaked, muddy, and weary. Yet there was a sense of accomplishment and unity that warmed him more than the fires could. He realized that moments of crisis, though difficult, revealed the strength of both individuals and community. Maria approached him as the final repairs were completed. "You have done well," she said softly, her voice carrying approval and gratitude. John felt a surge of pride, not for his own sake, but because he had contributed to the safety and well-being of the people he had come to care for deeply. He understood that true partnership required effort, understanding, and shared responsibility, and that his bond with Maria and his place in the village was strengthened by such challenges. Over time, John's perspective on life transformed. The desert, once a place of isolation and personal independence, became a landscape of connection and shared experience. The villagers, initially wary, had become a network of support, guidance, and friendship. Maria, once a stranger in need of assistance, had become a companion, a teacher, and a source of quiet inspiration. Together, they navigated the complexities of tradition, expectation, and human emotion, discovering that life was richest when shared with understanding, respect, and care. John also began to reflect on the nature of laws and customs that had initially seemed foreign or restrictive. He recognized that these traditions were not meant to constrain, but to protect, to guide, and to foster community cohesion. By accepting his responsibilities, he was participating in a system that valued human connection, honor, and the welfare of all members. His initial hesitation had given way to appreciation, and he approached each day with intention, humility, and a desire to contribute meaningfully. As the sun set on another long day, John and Maria stood together at the edge of the village, watching the horizon glow with the last light of day. The challenges they had faced, the work, the cultural adjustment, the slow building of trust, had forged a bond of mutual respect and understanding. John knew that their journey was far from over, that the path ahead would continue to require patience, courage, and empathy. Yet he felt a quiet confidence, rooted in experience and strengthened by the knowledge that he was no longer alone. In these moments, John understood a fundamental truth. Life's greatest challenges often brought the most meaningful growth. His journey had begun with a simple act of kindness, a ride given to a woman in need, but it had evolved into something far more profound. Through trials, adaptation, and quiet perseverance, he had discovered the depth of human connection, the strength found in respect and patience, and the joy that could emerge from shared effort and understanding. And so, as night fell over the village, John felt a sense of purpose and hope. He had faced tests that challenged his body, his mind, and his spirit. He had learned the value of cultural wisdom, the power of humility, and the importance of loyalty and trust. Most importantly, he had begun to build a life alongside Maria that, though unexpected, promised growth, companionship, and resilience. The turning point of his journey had arrived, not through force or choice alone, but through the patient unfolding of understanding, responsibility, and mutual respect. John knew that whatever lay ahead, he was ready. The lessons of the village had transformed him, shaping a new understanding of life, love, and duty. He had learned that commitment was more than obligation. It was an opportunity to grow, to connect, and to honor the lives of those around him. The challenges would continue, but he now faced them with confidence, empathy, and a quiet sense of determination that nothing could shake. The years passed gently, almost as if the desert itself had slowed to match the rhythm of John's new life. What had once seemed unfamiliar and intimidating, the village, its customs, its people, had become the landscape of his existence. John rose each morning with a sense of purpose, carrying out tasks that were once foreign but had become second nature. He tended the small herd of goats and cattle, helped repair and maintain the communal shelters, and assisted with daily chores alongside Maria. The work was hard, but it was steady, grounding, and meaningful. He had come to understand that life here was built not only on effort but on patience, respect, and connection. Maria had changed too, though more subtly. The weight of her past grief had lightened over time, replaced with a calm confidence that came from shared labor, mutual understanding, and the quiet growth of trust. She no longer seemed the fragile figure John had first encountered on the dusty trail. Instead, she radiated strength tempered with warmth, a woman whose resilience and dignity had earned not only John's admiration, but the deep respect of the entire village. Together they had grown into a partnership that transcended obligation, a bond forged through shared experience, empathy, and quiet commitment. The villagers, once cautious and skeptical of John's presence, now treated him with genuine acceptance. He had proven himself through actions rather than words, earning trust through consistent effort, respect for tradition, and willingness to learn. Children ran freely around him, asking questions about tasks or seeking guidance in their small projects. Elders offered quiet smiles and occasional nods, acknowledging his steady presence. Even those who had doubted his intentions months earlier had come to recognize that John's loyalty, humility, and patience were genuine. Through this acceptance, John began to feel a sense of belonging he had never experienced in his solitary life on the ranch. Yet life was not without its challenges. The desert remained harsh, and the demands of community life were unrelenting. Seasonal storms threatened crops and shelters, fires required constant vigilance, and disagreements occasionally arose among villagers. John approached each challenge with the lessons he had learned over the years: patience, observation, empathy, and action guided by respect. He understood that his role was not only to contribute labor, but to support the harmony of the community, to act with understanding in times of tension, and to honor the customs that had sustained the village for generations. One particular day tested all that John had learned. A severe drought had struck the region, leaving the water supply low and the crops struggling. The villagers gathered to discuss solutions, and John, though aware of his position as an outsider, offered practical ideas based on his experience managing water and irrigation on the ranch. His suggestions were met with cautious consideration. He spoke respectfully, listening carefully to the elders and acknowledging the wisdom in their responses. The discussion stretched over hours, with the villagers weighing options, sharing ideas, and ultimately agreeing on a plan that combined traditional knowledge with John's practical insights. The success of the plan reinforced his place in the community, demonstrating that collaboration, respect, and open-mindedness could overcome even the most difficult challenges. Through all of this, John and Maria continued to build their life together. The bond between them had evolved from necessity to companionship and over time to quiet affection. They worked side by side, shared meals, and supported one another through difficult moments. Their communication, once limited by language barriers, had grown more intuitive. John learned to understand subtle gestures, expressions, and tones, while Maria gradually came to rely on his strength, wisdom, and unwavering commitment. The partnership they had formed was no longer defined solely by law. It was a genuine connection rooted in respect, trust, and shared experience. John often reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He thought back to the day he first saw Maria walking alone on the desert trail, weary and vulnerable. He had offered her a simple act of kindness, unaware of the law that would bind him to her side. What had begun as a chance encounter had grown into a lifetime of learning, adaptation, and profound personal growth. He realized that the unexpected path he had taken had taught him more about humanity, responsibility, and connection than years of solitary life on the ranch ever could. Maria, too, reflected on the journey in her own quiet way. She had faced loss and hardship, and for a time had carried the weight of solitude. Yet through John's steadfastness, patience, and willingness to embrace the traditions of her people, she had found companionship, security, and even joy. Their shared experiences had nurtured a bond that was strong, resilient, and enduring. Though life had not unfolded according to either of their original plans, they had discovered fulfillment in a way neither could have anticipated. Over time, John began to take on a role that went beyond his duties as a husband and helper. He became a mentor to younger villagers, offering guidance and practical skills without overstepping boundaries. He shared his knowledge of ranching, tools, and problem-solving, while always showing respect for the wisdom and customs of the elders. The villagers came to value his insight, not as a replacement for their traditions, but as a complement to the collective knowledge that sustained their community. John understood that true contribution came from humility, cooperation, and the recognition that every individual had a role to play in the harmony of village life. Life also brought moments of quiet joy and beauty. John and Maria would walk together at dawn, observing the desert as it transformed with the rising sun. They celebrated small victories, successful crops, repaired structures, or the safe delivery of a newborn animal. Festivals and gatherings allowed them to connect with the broader community, sharing food, stories, and laughter. These moments reminded John that life was not merely about survival or duty, but about connection, gratitude, and appreciation for the world around them. Through these experiences, John came to understand the deeper meaning of the law that had initially bound him to Maria. It was not simply a rule. It was a framework that encouraged responsibility, protection, and partnership. It required him to be present, attentive, and accountable, not only to Maria but to the entire community. In fulfilling this law, he had discovered purpose, belonging, and a life richer than he had ever imagined. The years continued to pass, marked by seasons, challenges, and growth. John and Maria's bond deepened steadily. Their shared experiences, built on mutual respect and understanding, created a foundation that could weather any storm. They faced difficulties together, celebrated successes, and navigated the complexities of life with patience and empathy. The village thrived around them, and their presence became an integral part of its ongoing story. In quiet moments, John would sit and reflect on the life he had built. The vast open spaces of his former ranch, once the entirety of his world, now seemed like only a part of his journey. He had found a new kind of freedom, not the solitude he had once valued, but the freedom to grow, to contribute, and to connect deeply with others. Through his experiences, he learned that true strength came from compassion, patience, and the willingness to embrace the unexpected. Maria, too, found fulfillment in the life they had built together. The grief that had once defined her existence had softened, replaced by resilience, companionship, and the quiet satisfaction of shared accomplishment. She appreciated John's unwavering support, his respect for her culture, and his dedication to the responsibilities that had bound them together. Together, they had transformed the chance encounter on a desert trail into a lifetime of partnership and purpose. As they grew older, John and Maria became symbols of unity, respect, and dedication within the village. Their story, which began with a simple act of kindness, served as a reminder to all that life's most meaningful connections often emerge from unexpected circumstances. Their journey demonstrated that laws, customs, and traditions, when understood and embraced with humility, could guide individuals toward growth, fulfillment, and lasting bonds. Even in quiet moments, as the desert wind whispered across the sand and the sun dipped below the horizon, John and Maria felt the strength of their shared life. They had faced hardship, uncertainty, and cultural challenges, yet they had emerged with understanding, empathy, and a deep, abiding respect for one another. Their story, born from chance and guided by law, had become one of partnership, growth, and enduring love. John often reflected on the day he first offered Maria a ride. It had seemed like a small, simple act at the time, but it had set into motion a journey that transformed not only his life, but the life of the woman beside him and the entire community. Through patience, respect, and shared effort, they had discovered the true meaning of connection, responsibility, and resilience. Their journey was a testament to the power of kindness, the wisdom of tradition, and the unexpected beauty of life when one opens the heart to learning, understanding, and companionship. In the end, John and Maria's life in the village became a quiet, enduring story of growth, partnership, and respect. Their days were filled with work, learning, and shared moments of joy. They faced challenges together, celebrated accomplishments, and honored the customs that had guided their community for generations. The bond they had formed, initially imposed by law but ultimately nurtured by choice, respect, and understanding, stood as a living testament to the power of human connection and the unforeseen paths that life can offer. And so, under the vast expanse of the desert sky, John and Maria continued their life together, walking side by side, learning from one another, and embracing each day with gratitude, patience, and quiet joy. What had begun as a single act of kindness had grown into a lifetime of shared experience, respect, and enduring companionship, a life richer than either could have imagined.